What's the most denial you've ever seen someone in? When I was young, one of my friends died by doing a belly flop off a high ledge into a lake. It ruptured his aorta, from what I recall. He was 17. He had a younger brother who was completely destroyed by his death. We lived in a very, very small and rural community, and everyone knew everyone else. So people sort of gathered around him to help him cope. He returned to school pretty quickly after his brother's funeral, and I remember hearing him talk about how his brother used to climb trees with him. And he'd correct himself immediately. "He will climb trees with me this summer." That went on for months. Nobody knew what to do, so we all just sort of smiled and nodded along when he talked like that. Sad face.
That's a tough story. Losing a friend like that shakes up a community. It's hard to see someone you care about go through so much pain, especially as kids. The way his brother kept talking about him shows how much he missed him. It's strange how we sometimes don't know how to help, just sitting there, trying to support in our own ways. It's a reminder of how fragile life really is.
A girl I was friends with in high school denied being pregnant for her entire pregnancy. Even after she had the baby, she posted to Facebook saying she received the biggest surprise of her life. She was a thin girl. She was noticeably pregnant. Another friend and I confronted her about it, telling her she needed to go to the doctor, that what she was doing wasn't healthy for her or the baby. She was doing things that a pregnant woman should not be doing. She refused to acknowledge it, saying she was just getting fat. Luckily, the baby was completely healthy, but we are no longer friends because of that situation.
That's a wild story. It's crazy how some people just can't face the truth, even when it's obvious. I get wanting to avoid drama, but she put herself and the baby at risk. Sometimes, being truthful can cause a rift in friendships. It's good the baby is okay, but it's a shame that tension took a toll on your friendship. It's a reminder that honesty is important, even when it's uncomfortable.
A guy I know is an EMT, gets to the scene of a terrible accident. The people in the cars are told not to move until an EMT can evaluate them. One of the drivers becomes irate and gets out of his car arguing that he is fine and his place is to be. The EMTs explain that he might be suffering from shock and the adrenaline is masking any pain he might have from serious injuries and to please wait for an evaluation. He continues to argue. Then he turns around to go back to his car. While turning around, he turns his neck, snaps his spine, and drops dead.
That's a pretty wild story. It's crazy how adrenaline can mess with your perception of injuries. You think you're fine, then something unexpected happens. The guy just wanted to get on with his day, but ended up making a fatal mistake. Reminds you that sometimes you really need to listen to the professionals, especially in serious situations. It's a harsh reminder of how quickly things can change.
My wife went to college with someone who had Rachel Delosal, except that instead of pretending to be black, he pretended to be Native American. He went all in, insisting that people call him by his tribal name. His dorm was completely decorated in a Native American style, and he tried to dress the part too. He was very similarly discovered to be making it all up and ended up dropping out of college.
That's an interesting story. I guess some people go to great lengths to create an identity. It's wild how they try so hard to fit a narrative that isn't theirs. But when the truth comes out, it often leads to pretty awkward consequences. Dropping out must have felt like a heavy blow. People really do have different reasons for what they do, even if it doesn't always make sense.
I'm a lawyer. I represented a woman who was sued for wrongful death by the family of a passenger killed in the other car. The other car was driven by the deceased woman's brother. The deceased woman's brother was actually the one at fault for the accident, but the family could not accept that. The state police concluded, after performing an accident reconstruction, that the brother was at fault, and there were independent witnesses who stated that the brother was at fault. No matter how much evidence against him there was, the family could not accept it. I left the firm before the conclusion of the case, so I don't know how it panned out.
That's a tough situation. It's interesting how emotions can cloud judgment, even with all the evidence. It's unfortunate that the family couldn't see the truth. I guess sometimes people just hold on to their beliefs, regardless of the facts. Leaving before the case wrapped up must have been a strange feeling, not knowing how it ultimately turned out. Some cases really stick with you, even if you're not around to see the end.
In the mirror. As a 22-year-old headed to vet school, I was dating an abusive, pathological liar who had borrowed for K of my student loan money. Every member of my family and close friends hated him. He lied about literally everything. I kept convincing myself he was damaged by his early life in foster care and was a good person underneath. With enough love and support, he'd turn his life around. Instead, he destroyed my self-esteem and faith in others, cheated, took every available dime, and almost cost me my education and friends. Thank God I got away from him in time and didn't end up pregnant or hurt/killed. Whenever I think about that time, I am amazed anyone stuck by me through that shitstorm and my hardcore denial of who he was.
That's a tough situation. It's interesting how people can ignore the red flags when they're convinced they can help someone. It's good you got out before things got worse. Sometimes it takes a lot to see the truth, especially when you're emotionally invested. It's a relief to have friends who care enough to support you, even when you're in denial. Learning from the experience is what counts in the end.
My mother-in-law's deadbeat boyfriend told her he was a decorated war hero. We checked his army records and it said he attended basic training, and that was it. We told her that meant he didn't go any further and his stories were a lie. And she told us no. This proves that he went into secret sniper training like he said.
That's pretty wild. It's interesting how some people can create these elaborate stories about their past. This guy clearly thought he could impress her with that kind of claim. It's crazy that even with proof, she still believed him. It makes you wonder how far they are willing to go to maintain a facade. People really can see what they want to see, I guess.
Not particularly bad or anything, but a few years back I was at a mountain resort with my friend and his family, and our rental house had a pretty big backyard. Anyway, one day we were playing football and he threw it too high and it got stuck in a tree, and when he went to climb it, he got his leg stuck, and his dad had to come cut the branch off to free his leg. To this day, he insists that it was me and not him.
That's a funny situation. It's always something unexpected like that during trips. Climbing trees seems like a solid idea until it doesn't. His dad coming to the rescue adds another layer. It's interesting how memories like that stick with you, but the blame game is classic. It's all in good fun though, even if he still thinks it was your fault.
I work for an insurance company. A guy had a 2003 Ford Taurus, which he completely totaled. We told him the car was worth $2,500, which to be honest is not too bad considering the car had some significant pre-wreck wear and tear. The idiot just financed the car for something like $6,000 from some Express American Bald Eagle USA Auto Credit or something. One of those places with like 28% interest. He was so livid because he demanded that he got a deal on the car, and it was worth nearly $10,000. He has since lawyered up and is beginning the litigation process. The poor bastard is now going to be out lawyer fees on top of what he owes on the car.
It's interesting how some people get really attached to their car's value, even when reality says otherwise. I've seen friends get fired up over similar situations. They think their stuff is worth a lot more than it actually is. It just adds stress and money wasted on lawyers, which makes it worse. Sometimes it's better to just accept the loss and move on, but I guess not everyone sees it that way.
Have a friend who started going bald in his early 20s. Kept his hair long, and it's black and curly. The baldness started from the front and worked its way back. He refused to cut his hair, so he was balding on top with long curls in the back. He looked like a creeper, but refused to cut it. Eventually he gave in and shaved it, and he looks way better now, but for a long time there was some serious denial there.
That's an interesting situation. I had a friend who went through a similar phase. He had this long, shaggy hair while thinning on the top. It was kind of awkward, but he thought it was cool. After a while, he finally decided to shave it all off. Honestly, it suited him better. Sometimes it just takes a little push to accept change, you know? It was a funny transformation to witness.
Everything my mother's cousin does. She has a mentally ill daughter and had her taken by the state. Now my aunt is the daughter's legal guardian. I'll give an example. We'll call the mom Linda and the daughter Beatrice. Linda has a drug problem prescription. Apparently she had no idea Beatrice's baby teeth never fell out, so she had 2 sets of teeth. M for shark, already heard that one. On top of that, when she went in to get her teeth checked, they found 9 cavities. 9! Linda says to my aunt, "She never had cavities when she was with me." My aunt responds appropriately with, "Yo never took her to the dentist's office, Linda." Needless to say, I really do not like Linda.
It's wild how some people can be so oblivious. Linda really thought Beatrice was doing fine just because she didn't notice the obvious issues. It makes sense why your aunt feels the way she does. It's frustrating watching someone not take responsibility, especially when it impacts a child's health. You can only shake your head at that kind of denial. Some people just don't get it.
Met a victim of a Nigeria letter. There was not a thing in the world that cold convened he was being scammed. Even the cops got involved, but he somehow got the investigation dropped and sent even more money. I don't know how it all ended, but I guess not good, as he was taking loans against his house to finance it.
That's tough to hear. It's wild how some people can get so caught up in situations like that. He probably thought it was too good to be true but couldn't see it. I wonder what he was thinking when he decided to take loans against his house. It's sad when things spiral out of control like that, especially when the cops get involved but nothing changes.
Work at a college. We kept getting angry letter from a dad of a student saying his daughter told him that we refused to issue tuition receipts he needed for his income tax. We told him she dropped out partway through first semester, and we had not seen her since. He assured us she had completed almost all the coursework and had even done 2 placements. He refused to believe what we told him and got angrier and angrier. By the way, his daughter's email name was Sweet Little Princess 316, and so on. Finally, the dean told him he refused to discuss the situation with the dad over the phone, but would meet with them anytime as long as the dad showed up with the daughter. Dad then told us that the daughter refused as we had been abusive to her, and she was afraid for her safety. Best case of denial I ever saw.
Sometimes people just can't handle the truth. We had this dad convinced his daughter was thriving at school, even when she was a dropout. The fact she had an email like, "Sweet Little Princess 316, didn't help. He kept firing off angry letters, losing his cool. It got to the point where the dean had to step in, wanting to meet them both. Classic case of a dad not seeing what was right in front of him.
I have a friend who is almost 30 that thinks he is always on the cusp of finally getting ahead and won't have to live on the fringe of getting half his possessions repossessed. The guy makes $90 to $100K a year. He blames his financial woes on everything from Obamacare to the Saudis. The real reason is that anytime he has any extra money left over for that month, he doesn't just go out and buy something, he takes out a loan to buy something big. Every year, he gets a new expensive hobby that requires a lot of equipment. I used to think he would learn eventually, but he just keeps taking out new 20% loans. I've stopped bringing it up because it always turns into some weird, borderline incoherent rant against whatever he happened to see in the news that day that is somehow causing his financial problems.
That sounds like a pretty common situation. Some people just can't seem to handle their money well, no matter how much they make. Your friend is stuck in a cycle of borrowing and spending without really considering the long-term effects. It's tough to watch, and you've done the right thing by not bringing it up anymore. Sometimes people have to hit rock bottom before they change their ways.
My dad has worked hard all his life and has degenerative disc disease, which is where your vertebrae begin to, well, degenerate until there's nothing left. He believes with all his heart that he's going to win the lottery and live his life in leisure for the remainder of his days. Every night, he buys a lottery ticket, and every morning when he checks what numbers were drawn, he says something to the effect of "God damn it," as if he had actually believed he was going to win that night. I'm glad that at such a young age, I've been around so many people who hold delusions. I hope I'll be better prepared to protect myself from them as a result.
It's tough to see a parent struggle like that. Your dad's hope for the lottery seems to give him some kind of escape, even if it's unrealistic. It's interesting to think about how our experiences shape our views. Being around those delusions can definitely teach you a lot about what to avoid in life. Hopefully, you find a balance between hope and reality as you grow.
This actually doesn't seem uncommon for people in their 20s and 30s. There's a disconnect between their short-term financial and career decision-making and what they think their long-term situation will be. Step 1. Just try to keep your head above water. Step 2. Keep doing what you're doing. Step 3. Settle down, buy a house, retire, whatever.
I get it. A lot of people my age are just focused on getting by day to day. It's like we have this idea that everything will just work out later. I've seen friends juggle jobs and bills while dreaming about a stable future. They keep pushing through, hoping it all clicks. I guess it's part of figuring things out in life, even if the plan feels a bit fuzzy.
I overheard the social worker the other day mention that the cost of the patient's stay in the hospital is in excess of $50 million. Mom and dad and uninsured. Well, after a certain point, and probably long before 50 mil, you're so far in debt that you'll never get out of it, and it's no longer a reason to consider unplugging your son.
It's tough hearing about the financial burden families face with healthcare. It can feel overwhelming when the cost of treatment is so high, especially when insurance doesn't cover it. I remember a friend who had a similar struggle with their family member. They were stressed about the bills, even though all they wanted was to focus on healing. It's crazy how money impacts such personal situations. Just makes you think about priorities.
My very Catholic grandparents refuse to believe my uncle, the youngest of their 6 kids, is gay. He is an extremely successful attorney that relocated to London from the US. I'm sure to live the life he wanted away from my in denial grandparents. They still insist his partner of 22 years is just his roommate, despite showing off professional-style pictures of them in white robes and wedding rings. We all know, and he's not even trying to hide it anymore. But my grandparents still won't admit they have a gay son.
It's interesting how some people can build their own reality. Your uncle seems to have found his happiness away from that situation. It must be tough for him, but at least he's living authentically. Your grandparents' denial feels pretty out of touch, especially with all the evidence. It's a classic case of ignoring what doesn't fit their beliefs. Sometimes family dynamics can be really complicated like that.
It can be mind-boggling to see this mentality in action. My young cousin very obviously has Asperger's, but my aunt and uncle insist that he's simply gifted. Don't get me wrong, he's a brilliant and sweet kid, but there's clearly something bigger going on there, and denying that keeps him from getting the extra help he needs. They're really doing their child a disservice, Mo.
It's strange when people don't see the full picture. My friend had a similar situation with his brother. He's talented in many ways, but my friend's parents just labeled him as a genius, without recognizing his struggles. It felt like they were ignoring the signs. Sometimes, understanding and accepting the reality is really important, especially for getting the right support. Just feels like a missed opportunity for growth.
Had a girl like that in high school as well. I told her that people were spreading rumors and saying she is pregnant. She told me they were ulcers. Except that ulcers are holes and don't make you look obviously pregnant. Our guess was she was just trying to wait out graduation. She looked to be about 5 to 6 months along when it began to be very obvious and not a question anymore. We only had 1 month left of school.
That reminds me of a friend who had a similar situation. People started whispering about her too. She kept saying it was just a food baby, which we all knew wasn't true. She tried to ride it out till graduation, but with time, everyone figured it out. It was awkward for her, but we just tried to support her the best we could. High school rumors can be pretty brutal.
This basically applies to all addictions. I can quit whenever I want, but then when you ask them to stop, they say they don't want to know. Acceptance is the first step at it. Someone said there could be a person who doesn't have a drinking problem is challenged to stop, and does it because they're not actually addicted. I totally agree. I realized that the way I phrased this made it seem like a huge generalization of addiction, which I did not intend, which is why I had the qualifier basically. Perhaps a better phrasing would be this applies to a lot of cases of addiction, but not all of them. There are always different cases, like the other person who replied to me about how he stopped smoking weed. Sorry that my phrasing was so absolute. I just think denial is a common thing overall.
Addiction is tricky. I had a friend who claimed he could easily stop smoking. We joked about it, but when it came time to quit for a week, he just shrugged and said he wasn't ready. It wasn't that he couldn't, but he didn't want to. It's strange how denial works for some. I guess realizing you have a problem is harder than simply admitting it.
Some people want so badly to be different and special. Once at my store, a woman asked for a book on Cherokee mysticism or something and proudly told me she was 136 Cherokee. Lady, at this point, you're white. And have you noticed that everyone had an Indian princess for a great-great-grandmother? Never a regular Indian woman. Always a princess.
It's funny how some people cling to a bit of heritage just to feel unique. I once met a guy who swore he was related to a famous celebrity. Turns out, he just liked the same last name. It's like we all want to belong to something special, but sometimes the stories we tell don't really add up. Just be yourself, you don't need a title or a lineage.
I don't want to say that all homeschooling parents are like that, but I had a very similar experience. My entire education from ages 10 to 18 was self-study, no help whatsoever. Neither parent was college educated. I was isolated and barely allowed to socialize. I ended up getting into a good college by studying my ass off for the SATs, and my social skills eventually caught up, but that doesn't mean I wasn't a victim of educational neglect. Naturally, since everything turned out fine, my parents love to think they did the right thing.
It's tough when the system is on you like that. Self-studying can feel lonely, and not having that support hits hard. It's good that you managed to get into a good college. It shows grit. But it does leave a mark when you miss out on socializing. Parents often see the end result without realizing the struggle behind it. It's a mixed bag for sure.
Wish I could tell you more. We held graduation like normal, and she didn't participate. At this stage, if there has been any more follow-up on it, then they've kept it kind of quiet. To be fair, the administrators, don't really want to be too open about it all. And it isn't something that I'd know about through work normally. So unless they keep doubling down on the denial, chances are I'll never hear anything else about it. Last I asked, nothing else had transpired after that last meeting, except the mother appeared to slowly be doubting things. But that was after a 3-hour meeting with my colleague, boss, and my boss.
Sounds like a really complicated situation. Graduation is supposed to be a celebration, but when someone doesn't participate, it kind of changes the tone. It's tough when the people in charge aren't forthcoming with info. The doubts from the mother could mean things are still unresolved. Just hanging in uncertainty can be hard for everyone involved. It's a shame things had to go this way.
I dated a guy for 3 years in university. He lived out of province, and our school was 4 hours from my home. My family never met him, and in that pre-cell phone camera time, the only photos I had of us together were the formal shots taken at the annual university gala. He wore the same tux in all 3 photos and took the same basic pose. To this day, my family suspects that he was actually a cardboard cutout.
That's an interesting situation. It must have been tough not having your family meet him, especially after 3 years. The idea of him being a cardboard cutout is kind of funny. Those same photos every year must have made for a strange memory. It's like a running joke now, even if it wasn't at the time. Relationships can be complicated like that, especially when distance is involved.
Yes, I forgot to mention my dad's lottery tickets as well. He plays $5 per drawing, twice per week, and has played the same numbers for as long as I can remember. He still believes that one of these days his numbers will hit, and it will be smooth sailing from here on out. I think if he ever actually wins, he'll have a heart attack and die.
It's kind of wild how people get attached to routines, like your dad sticking to those lottery numbers. It's interesting to think about how much hope he places in them. I guess we all have our quirks, right? If he ever does win, it might just be the biggest shock of his life. But hey, at least he's got something to look forward to each week.
It took my grandmother years to realize that her brother was gay, and that his partner Nigel wasn't just his housemate, seeing as the room he was meant to be sleeping in was always completely bare except for the bed. Not because she didn't want to believe it or anything, just because she was completely clueless.
It's funny how some people just don't pick up on things. My grandmother was one of those. She had no clue about her brother and Nigel for years. The signs were all there, but she was just living in her own world. I guess sometimes people just see what they want to see, and it takes a long time for reality to sink in. Family dynamics can be interesting that way.
ALS is really tough. Lost my grandmother to it over 2 years ago. She was a fiercely independent woman that lived on her own, walked every morning, helped make bagels at my uncle's deli, volunteered for Habitat for Humanity, and so many other wonderful things. The town she lived in named a street after her just this year.
That's a heavy story. Losing someone to ALS is rough. Your grandmother sounds like she had a full life, always helping out and staying active. It's nice to see she's being remembered with that street name. It's a testament to the impact she had on her community. Losing someone like that leaves a big hole, but I hope you have some good memories to hold on to.
I had never actually thought about this either. When I first saw the moon in Australia, I had a good laugh and said, shit, we really are upside down here. I then finally learned where the term rabbit in the moon came from. Because while we have the man on the moon up here, referencing the face-like image in the craters we see when it's full, to them it's upside down and resembles a rabbit.
That's an interesting take on the moon. It's funny how perspective changes everything. Seeing the same thing but interpreting it differently just because of where you are. I guess that makes you think about all the little differences in culture and belief. It's sort of cool to learn about how different people see the same sky. Makes the world a bit bigger, in a way.
How someone can disregard the most basic, simple concepts of physical logic like this is truly awe-inspiring to me. It's pretty easy to think of a wee little bug on a marble. The marble curves steeply downward from the bug's perspective. Then a bug on a basketball. The horizon of the basketball still seems curved perhaps, but the wee little bug feels like it's on flat ground. As the size of the sphere increases relative to size perspective of the viewer, it's obviously going to get to the point of being unnoticeable at all. And this is why I felt this was the perfect addition to this thread. Because one has to be in the most impenetrable state of denial to not even consider basic logical concepts like this.
I remember a time my friend tried to explain gravity using a water balloon. He said, "Imagine a bug on it." Seemed simple enough. But then he went into this long rant about how the balloon's curve tricked the bug. I just nodded, but honestly, it was just a balloon. Sometimes, he overcomplicates simple ideas, making me wonder if he's just trying to sound smart. It was definitely a moment.
A buddy of mine is an ER doc. According to him, he knows exactly how to avoid being shot, stabbed, or otherwise beaten. All you have to do is not mind your own business. Because, according to him, nearly everyone who he has to treat for such injuries was just minding their own business. He says he had no idea how dangerous minding your own business could be.
That's pretty wild. I guess it's true that some people can end up in crazy situations just by staying out of things. It's kind of ironic, really. You think you're doing the right thing by keeping to yourself, but that could put you in more danger. Seems like his job gives him a unique perspective on what to avoid in life. Just goes to show that safety sometimes means getting involved instead.
I work for a pain doctor. In our state, there are very strict rules when you are prescribed narcotics and you have to sign a pain contract. Taking more than prescribed is one way to get a strike against you, and if you get 3 strikes, well, you are out. Unfortunately, you can just move on to the next doctor and start all over, but people quickly run out of options. Also, MDs tend to request your records from your previous provider and will be very wary of prescribing to patients with this kind of history. What I don't get is typically pain practices do random pill counts and the like to ensure this kind of thing doesn't go on. I suppose it depends on your state laws and the thoroughness of the MD or practice.
I used to work at a clinic where we dealt with a lot of pain management cases. It's surprising how strict the rules are around prescriptions. I met patients who were really struggling after getting strikes against them. It's a tough spot to be in. You think you can just find another doctor, but it doesn't always work that way. The random checks seem like a mixed bag, depending on who you happen to see.
I had a great experience with homeschooling. I actually just finished my first year of real high school with excellent marks after being homeschooled for a decade. My parents always made sure I was doing a lot of extracurricular stuff while homeschool, so I think that had to do with my positive experience. I think for homeschooling to work, one, if not both parents have to be invested in the process. One of my friends is homeschooled and his parents focus more on his older siblings, causing him to fall far behind in his studies. The worst part is he really wants to go to school, and his parents don't let him, which is just absurd. My parents always told me they were open to sending me to school, and when I was younger, actually used it as a threat.
That's cool that you had a good experience with homeschooling. It makes sense when parents are involved, like yours were. It's tough for your friend, though. Being stuck and wanting something else can be really frustrating. Sounds like you had a good balance with the extra activities. It's interesting how different the experiences can be, even when the setup is the same. Guess it really depends on the family dynamics.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.